The rain poured down hard on the streets of Manhattan as Sarah Collins rushed through the heavy wooden doors of the Grand Sterling, one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. Her uniform was slightly damp, and she knew she was running late for her evening shift. At 23 years old, Sarah had been working as a waitress at this upscale establishment for almost 2 years now, trying to make ends meet while supporting her younger brother through college. The Grand Sterling was the kind of place where millionaires and celebrities dined regularly. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceilings, and every table was set with fine china and sterling silver cutlery. The carpet was so thick that footsteps made no sound, and classical music played softly in the background. Sarah had grown used to serving wealthy clients who often looked right through her as if she were invisible. Tonight was particularly busy. The restaurant was hosting a private event for some of the city's wealthiest business people. Sarah tied her apron and quickly joined the other servers who were preparing for the evening rush. Her manager, Mr. Peterson, gave her a stern look as she arrived, but said nothing. He knew Sarah was one of his most reliable workers, even if she occasionally ran a few minutes late. As the guests began to arrive, Sarah moved smoothly between tables, taking orders and serving food with practiced efficiency. She had learned to smile politely, speak only when spoken to, and never make eye contact for too long. That was the unspoken rule when serving the ultra-rich. They didn't want to be reminded that regular people like her existed in their world. Among the guests that evening was Marcus Thornfield, a real estate tycoon worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He was a man in his early 50s with silver hair, an expensive suit, and an expression that suggested he owned everything and everyone around him. Marcus had built his fortune by buying struggling properties, renovating them, and selling them for huge profits. He was known throughout the city as someone who got what he wanted, and who had little patience for people he considered beneath him. Marcus sat at the center table with several business associates and their wives. They were celebrating the closing of a major deal that would make them all even richer. The champagne flowed freely, and their laughter grew louder as the evening progressed. Sarah had been assigned to their section, which meant she would be dealing with their demands all night. From the moment she approached their table, Marcus looked at her with barely concealed contempt. When she asked for their drink orders, he waved his hand dismissively and said the words to one of his companions rather than to her directly, as if she weren't standing right there. Sarah kept her composure and wrote down their requests without comment. Throughout the meal, Marcus seemed to take pleasure in making things difficult. He sent his steak back twice, claiming it wasn't cooked properly, even though other servers whispered to Sarah that it looked perfect. He complained that his wine glass had a smudge, though Sarah could see no mark on it. He snapped his fingers to get her attention rather than speaking to her like a human being. Sarah endured it all with quiet dignity. She needed this job desperately. Her brother's tuition was due next month, and their mother's medical bills from last year were still not fully paid off. She couldn't afford to lose her temper with a customer no matter how rude he was. So she smiled, apologized for imaginary mistakes, and did everything she could to make Marcus and his party happy. As dessert was being served, Sarah noticed that the restaurant's manager had wheeled out the beautiful grand piano that sat in the corner of the main dining room. The Grand Sterling was known for having live piano music during special events, and tonight a professional pianist was scheduled to perform. However, as Mr. Peterson approached the piano, Sarah could see the worry on his face. The manager walked quickly to the kitchen area where Sarah was preparing a tray of coffee cups. He looked stressed and spoke in a low, urgent voice. The pianist who was supposed to perform tonight had called in sick at the last minute. There was no time to find a replacement, and the guests were expecting entertainment. Mr. Peterson asked if any of the staff knew how to play piano, even just a little bit. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. She knew how to play. In fact, she had been playing piano since she was 5 years old. Her late father had been a music teacher, and he had taught her everything he knew about music before he passed away when she was 16. Piano had been her passion, her escape, her dream. She had even received a full scholarship to a prestigious music conservatory 7 years ago, but Sarah had turned down that scholarship. When her father died, her family had fallen into financial trouble. Her mother got sick, and her younger brother was still in high school. Someone had to work and keep the family together. Sarah had set aside her dreams of becoming a professional pianist and took whatever jobs she could find to support her family. The piano in her tiny apartment was covered with dust now. She barely had time to even look at it, let alone play. She hesitated before speaking to Mr. Peterson. A part of her wanted to volunteer, to feel the keys under her fingers again, to play the beautiful music that once defined who she was. But another part of her was afraid of being vulnerable in front of all these people who already looked down on her, afraid of not being good enough anymore after years away from serious practice, afraid of what Marcus Thornfield and his cruel friends might say. Before she could make up her mind, Marcus himself appeared near the kitchen entrance. He had apparently overheard the conversation between Sarah and the manager. A nasty smile spread across his face as he looked at Sarah, and she could immediately tell that he was about to make the situation worse. Marcus announced loudly enough for nearby guests to hear that he had just discovered their waitress could play piano. He said it with a mocking tone as if the very idea was ridiculous. He suggested to Mr. Peterson that they should have Sarah play for them, since there was no other entertainment available. The way he said it made it clear that he expected her to fail, that he wanted to humiliate her in front of everyone. Mr. Peterson looked uncomfortable but felt pressured by the situation. The guests were watching now, curious about the commotion. Marcus Thornfield was too important a customer to refuse, and the restaurant needed the entertainment that had been promised. With an apologetic look at Sarah, the manager quietly asked if she would be willing to play something for the guests. Sarah stood there frozen, her hands trembling slightly as she held the coffee tray. She looked at Marcus, who was smirking at her with obvious satisfaction. She looked at the other wealthy guests who were now staring in her direction, with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed amusement. She looked at the grand piano sitting in the corner, its polished surface reflecting the light from the chandeliers above. This was the moment when Sarah had to make a choice. She could refuse and walk away, protecting herself from potential embarrassment but confirming what people like Marcus already believed about people like her. Or she could walk to that piano, sit down and show them who she really was beneath the waitress uniform. Her heart pounded as she made her decision. Sarah set down the coffee tray with hands that had stopped trembling. Something had shifted inside her in that moment of decision. She looked at Marcus Thornfield and gave him a small, quiet nod. Yes, she would play. The smirk on his face grew wider, and he turned to his companions with a look that said they were about to witness something entertaining at this poor waitress's expense. Mr. Peterson seemed relieved that she had agreed, though he also looked worried about what might happen next. He gestured toward the piano and told the other servers to hold off on serving for a few minutes while Sarah performed. The buzz of conversation in the restaurant began to quiet as people realized something unusual was happening. Wealthy diners turned in their seats to see what was going on. Sarah untied her apron and folded it neatly, setting it on an empty chair. She walked across the dining room toward the grand piano, feeling dozens of eyes following her every step. The walk seemed to take forever. She could hear whispered comments from various tables. Some people sounded curious. Others sounded skeptical. A few were already chuckling as if the idea of their waitress playing piano was some kind of joke. When she reached the piano, Sarah stood beside it for a moment, looking down at the keys she hadn't played in front of anyone for years. The instrument was a magnificent Steinway grand piano, probably worth more than she would earn in 5 years of working at the restaurant. She pulled out the bench and sat down, adjusting her position the way her father had taught her so long ago. Marcus Thornfield had positioned himself at a nearby table where he could see her clearly. He leaned back in his chair with his arms crossed, that same cruel smile on his face. He called out to her in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, asking what she was going to play for them. He added a comment about hoping it would be something simple, maybe Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, and his friends laughed at the insult. Sarah didn't respond to his mockery. Instead, she placed her fingers gently on the keys and closed her eyes for just a moment. She thought about her father, about the countless hours they had spent together at their old upright piano in their small living room. She remembered how he used to tell her that music wasn't about showing off or impressing people. Music was about truth, about expressing something real and deep that words couldn't capture. When Sarah opened her eyes and began to play, she chose Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, Opus 9, number 2. It was one of the most beautiful and technically demanding pieces in the classical piano repertoire. Her father had helped her master it when she was 17, just a year before he died. She hadn't played it in a long time, but as her fingers found their positions, muscle memory began to take over. The first notes floated through the restaurant like a whisper. They were so soft and delicate that people had to lean forward to hear them. The usual background noise of the restaurant, the clinking of glasses and silverware, the murmur of conversation, all faded into silence. Sarah's playing had immediately commanded attention in a way that felt almost magical. As the piece continued, Sarah's fingers moved across the keys with increasing confidence. The years away from serious practice hadn't stolen her gift. If anything, all the hardship and sacrifice she had endured since giving up her scholarship had added something deeper to her playing. There was emotion in every note, a kind of longing and beauty that came from real-life experience rather than just technical training. The melody of the nocturne was achingly beautiful. It rose and fell like waves, with moments of tenderness followed by passages of greater intensity. Sarah's right hand carried the main melody, while her left hand provided a steady, supportive foundation. The way she used dynamics, playing some sections very softly and others with more power, showed a level of musical sophistication that stunned everyone listening. Marcus Thornfield's smirk had completely disappeared. He sat forward in his chair now, his expression transformed from mockery to genuine shock. His business associates were equally stunned. One of the wives at his table had tears forming in her eyes, moved by the unexpected beauty of what she was hearing. Around the restaurant, every single person had stopped what they were doing to listen. The waiters and waitresses stood frozen in place, some of them with their mouths literally hanging open. They had worked alongside Sarah for months or years, and none of them had any idea she possessed this incredible talent. Mr. Peterson stood near the kitchen entrance with his hand over his mouth, hardly able to believe what he was witnessing. Sarah was completely lost in the music now. Her body swayed slightly as she played, and her face showed the intense concentration and emotion that comes from performing at the highest level. This wasn't just someone who had learned to play piano. This was a true artist, someone with genuine gift and years of serious training. The contrast between the humble waitress they had all ignored and the brilliant musician now commanding the entire room was almost impossible to process. The middle section of the nocturne featured runs of notes that required incredible finger dexterity and control. Sarah's hands moved so quickly they seemed to blur, yet every single note was clear and perfectly placed. Then the piece would slow down again, becoming tender and contemplative. She was telling a story through the music, taking everyone in the restaurant on an emotional journey they hadn't expected and would never forget. As Sarah played, something remarkable began to happen. People who had been looking at her with amusement or condescension just minutes earlier were now looking at her with respect and even awe. The invisible barrier between the wealthy customers and the working-class waitress seemed to dissolve. In that moment, everyone in the restaurant was simply human, connected by the universal language of beautiful music. One elderly gentleman in the corner of the restaurant began to quietly cry. The piece reminded him of his late wife, who used to play piano for him in their youth. A young couple held hands as they listened, feeling the romance and tenderness in the music. Even some of the kitchen staff had come out to the dining room to hear what was happening, standing quietly near the walls with expressions of pride that one of their own could create something so magnificent. Marcus Thornfield looked like he had been slapped. All his wealth and power and business success meant nothing in this moment. He had tried to humiliate Sarah, to put her in her place, to remind her that she was just a waitress who served people like him. Instead, she had revealed herself to be someone with a gift he could never buy or possess. His attempt to embarrass her had backfired spectacularly, and everyone in the restaurant was aware of it. Sarah approached the final section of the nocturne. Her playing had never been better. Perhaps because she was playing not for an audition or a competition, but simply to express something true about herself. Every note was filled with the love of music that had sustained her through difficult years, with memories of her father, with the dreams she had set aside but never quite abandoned. When she played the final gentle notes of the piece, there was a moment of complete silence in the restaurant. It was as if no one wanted to break the spell that the music had created. Sarah lifted her hands from the keys slowly, opening her eyes and looking down at the piano with a mixture of joy and sadness on her face. Then the applause began. It started with one person and spread rapidly through the entire restaurant like wildfire. People stood up from their tables, giving Sarah a standing ovation. The sound was thunderous, echoing off the high ceilings of the Grand Sterling. Servers were clapping, kitchen staff were clapping, and most importantly, every single wealthy customer in the restaurant was on their feet applauding this waitress who had just shown them what true talent looked like. Sarah stood up from the piano bench, feeling overwhelmed by the response. Tears were streaming down her face, though she was trying to hold them back. She had forgotten how good it felt to play, how alive music made her feel. For just a few minutes, she hadn't been a struggling waitress worried about bills and responsibilities. She had been herself, the person she was meant to be. As the applause continued, Sarah looked over at Marcus Thornfield. He was still seated, not applauding, his face a mixture of emotions that were hard to read. Shock was certainly there, but also something that might have been shame. He had badly misjudged this young woman, and everyone knew it. His attempt to humiliate her had revealed his own smallness instead. The standing ovation continued for what felt like an eternity to Sarah. She gave a small bow, wiping the tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand. As the applause finally began to fade, she moved to return to her workstation, thinking the extraordinary moment was over and life would return to normal. But Mr. Peterson rushed over to her, his face flushed with excitement and emotion. The manager took both of Sarah's hands in his and told her that was the most incredible thing he had ever witnessed in all his years at the Grand Sterling. His eyes were actually moist with tears. He apologized for never knowing about her gift, for never asking his staff about their lives and dreams beyond the work they did for him. Sarah assured him it was fine, that she had never told anyone because it felt like a part of her life that was finished. As they spoke, several customers approached. The elderly gentleman who had cried during the performance walked up slowly with his cane and told Sarah that she had given him a precious gift tonight. Hearing Chopin's nocturne had brought back memories of his beloved wife that he treasured more than anything. He reached into his wallet and tried to hand Sarah $100 bill, but she gently refused it. She told him his kind words were payment enough. More people came over to speak with her. A well-dressed woman in diamonds and pearls said she had season tickets to the Metropolitan Opera and had heard countless professional pianists, but rarely had she been so moved by a performance. She asked Sarah where she had trained and seemed shocked to learn that Sarah had turned down a conservatory scholarship and had been working as a waitress for years instead of pursuing music. The questions kept coming. People wanted to know why she wasn't performing professionally, why someone with her obvious talent was working in a restaurant. Sarah explained briefly about her family situation, about her father's death and the financial struggles that followed. Some people nodded with understanding, while others looked uncomfortable, perhaps recognizing how differently life had treated them compared to this talented young woman. Throughout all of this, Marcus Thornfield remained seated at his table. He watched the scene unfolding around Sarah with an expression that was difficult to interpret. His business associates were talking quietly among themselves, occasionally glancing in his direction. Everyone was aware that Marcus had tried to humiliate Sarah, and everyone had seen how spectacularly that plan had failed. Finally, Marcus stood up from his table and walked toward Sarah. The conversations around her died down as people noticed him approaching. There was tension in the air. Some wondered if he would try to save face by saying something cruel or dismissive. Others hoped he would do the decent thing and apologize. Sarah saw him coming and straightened her posture, preparing herself for whatever would happen next. Marcus stopped a few feet away from her and stood there silently for a long moment. He seemed to be struggling with something internally. His face showed a conflict between his usual arrogance and something else, something more human that he rarely let anyone see. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before, lacking its usual commanding tone. He told Sarah that he had made a mistake. He admitted that he had wanted to embarrass her, to have a laugh at her expense. He said he was used to getting everything he wanted and treating people as if they only mattered based on how much money they had or what they could do for him. But her performance had shown him something he had forgotten, or perhaps never really understood. Talent, beauty, and worth couldn't be measured by bank accounts or job titles. The apology seemed to cost Marcus something to deliver. He wasn't used to admitting he was wrong or showing vulnerability in front of others. Some of his business associates looked genuinely surprised to hear him speak this way. Sarah listened carefully, trying to determine if the apology was genuine or just another performance for the watching crowd. Marcus continued. He said that his own daughter had wanted to study music years ago, but he had forbidden it, telling her it was a waste of time and that she needed to focus on business school instead. Now his daughter worked in his real estate company but seemed unhappy, and they barely spoke anymore. Watching Sarah play had made him wonder if he had made a terrible mistake, if he had destroyed something beautiful in his own daughter by forcing her to abandon her dreams. This confession seemed to surprise everyone, including Marcus himself. He looked vulnerable in a way that probably none of his business associates had ever seen before. Sarah felt her anger toward him softening slightly, though she remained cautious. She thanked him for his apology but didn't say much else, unsure how to respond to such an unexpected turn of events. Then Marcus did something that shocked everyone even more. He pulled out his phone and made a call right there in the restaurant. People could hear him talking to someone named Richard, asking about venues and available dates. When he finished the call, Marcus looked at Sarah and told her that he had just spoken with a friend who managed a prestigious concert hall in the city. He wanted to sponsor a solo piano recital for Sarah, all expenses paid to be held within the next month. Sarah's eyes went wide with disbelief. She started to protest, saying she couldn't possibly accept such an offer, that she hadn't performed seriously in years, and wouldn't be ready for something so significant. But Marcus held up his hand and insisted. He said it was the least he could do to make up for his behavior, and that the world deserved to hear her play properly, not just stumble upon her talent by accident in a restaurant. The other customers around them began encouraging Sarah to accept. The woman with the opera season ticket said she would personally make sure all her wealthy friends attended. The elderly gentleman promised to buy tickets for everyone in his family. Even some of the restaurant staff were nodding enthusiastically, urging Sarah to take this incredible opportunity. Mr. Peterson added his voice to the chorus. He told Sarah that the restaurant would give her a leave of absence to prepare for the recital, with full pay. He said he had been a terrible manager for never noticing the treasure that had been working in his restaurant all along, and he wanted to do whatever he could to support her musical career. Sarah looked around at all these faces, some belonging to people who had ignored her completely just an hour ago, all now encouraging her to pursue her dreams. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the sudden turn her life had taken. This morning she had been worried about making rent and paying her brother's tuition. Now she was being offered a chance to perform in a major concert hall, sponsored by a millionaire, with an audience that was already promising to attend. It seemed too good to be true, like something from a fairy tale rather than real life. But there was a practical voice in her head raising concerns. She had responsibilities. Her brother needed her financial support. Her mother relied on the money she sent home. Could she really take time off to prepare for a concert that might not lead anywhere? What if she failed? What if the performance went badly and she embarrassed herself in front of a large audience? What if this was all just a momentary burst of enthusiasm from guilty, wealthy people who would forget about her by tomorrow? Sarah asked if she could have some time to think about it. Marcus nodded, understanding the weight of the decision. He handed her his business card and told her to call him within the next few days with her answer. He also did something else that surprised everyone. He pulled out his checkbook and wrote a check for $10,000, handing it to Sarah. When she tried to refuse, he insisted it was not charity, but rather compensation for the extraordinary performance she had just given. Several other customers followed Marcus's lead. The woman with the opera tickets handed Sarah several $100s. The elderly gentleman insisted she take money to help with her family expenses. Within minutes, Sarah found herself holding thousands of dollars in cash and checks from people who had been complete strangers an hour ago. She felt dizzy with the surreality of the situation. As the evening wound down and customers began to leave, many of them stopped by to speak with Sarah one more time. They thanked her for the unexpected gift of her music, and several left contact information saying they wanted to help her career in whatever way they could. The restaurant had witnessed something extraordinary tonight, and no one who was present would ever forget it. By the time the last customers left, Sarah was emotionally and physically exhausted. She sat down at an empty table while the other servers cleaned up around her. Mr. Peterson brought her a glass of water and sat down across from her. He told her again how sorry he was for never seeing her as a complete person, for only thinking of her as an employee rather than someone with dreams and talents. Sarah accepted his apology and admitted that she had never really told anyone at work about her background or her love of music. She had kept that part of herself locked away, thinking it was better to focus on survival than to dwell on abandoned dreams. Tonight had cracked open something inside her that had been closed for a very long time, and she wasn't sure how to process everything that was happening. The manager encouraged her strongly to accept Marcus's offer of the concert. He said that opportunities like this didn't come along often, especially for someone without connections or wealth to smooth the way. Even if the concert didn't launch a major career, even if it was just one night of doing what she loved, wouldn't that be worth it? Sarah admitted she was afraid, but also more tempted than she wanted to admit. When Sarah finally left the restaurant that night, she walked home through streets that looked exactly the same as always, but somehow felt completely different. The rain had stopped, and the city lights reflected off the wet pavement. She thought about her father, and what he would say if he could see what had happened tonight. She imagined he would tell her to be brave, to take the chance, to let her music shine the way he had always believed it would. Sarah barely slept that night. She lay in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling while her mind raced through everything that had happened. The money from the customer sat on her kitchen table, more cash than she had seen in months. Marcus Thornfield's business card was next to it, along with the names and phone numbers of several other people who had promised to help her. When morning finally came, Sarah called her younger brother Daniel at his college dorm. She needed to talk to someone she trusted about this impossible decision. Daniel was 20 years old, studying engineering, and he had always been supportive of Sarah's sacrifices for the family. When she told him about the previous night's events, he was silent for a long moment, processing the story. Daniel's response was immediate and firm. He told Sarah she absolutely had to accept the concert offer. He said she had given up too much already for him and their mother, and that it was time for her to pursue her own dreams. When Sarah protested about the tuition money and family expenses, Daniel interrupted her. He revealed that he had been working a part-time job he hadn't told her about, and that he had also applied for additional scholarships. He didn't want to be the reason she gave up this opportunity. The conversation with her brother helped clarify things for Sarah. She realized that part of her reluctance came not from practical concerns, but from fear. She was afraid of wanting something so badly and potentially failing. She was afraid of opening herself up to hope after years of just surviving. She was afraid that maybe she wasn't as good as people thought, that the applause last night had been more about surprise than genuine appreciation of her talent. But another part of her, the part that had been silenced for too long, was desperately hungry for this chance. That part of her wanted to sit at a piano for hours every day, to rediscover the pieces she used to know, to challenge herself with new music. That part of her remembered why she had fallen in love with piano in the first place, and it was begging her not to let this opportunity slip away. Sarah spent the morning walking through Central Park, trying to clear her head and make a final decision. She watched street musicians performing for spare change and wondered if that would be her fate, if she pursued music seriously. She saw business people rushing past in expensive suits, heading to jobs that probably paid well but might not fulfill them. She thought about her father's old saying that a life lived in fear of failure was barely a life at all. By early afternoon, Sarah had made up her mind. She pulled out Marcus Thornfield's business card and dialed the number. A secretary answered and seemed surprised when Sarah identified herself, as if Marcus had already told his staff about her. Within moments, Marcus himself was on the line, his voice eager to hear her answer. Sarah accepted the offer. She told Marcus she wanted to do the concert, though she would need time to prepare properly. Marcus sounded genuinely pleased, not with the satisfaction of someone who had gotten his way, but with what seemed like real happiness that Sarah was giving herself this chance. He told her that the concert hall had been booked for 6 weeks from now, which would give her time to practice and prepare a full program. Marcus also surprised Sarah by offering additional support. He said he had contacts with several professional piano teachers in the city, and he would pay for her to take lessons to prepare for the concert. When Sarah protested that this was too much, Marcus told her that he had spent millions of dollars on business deals that meant nothing in the end, and that helping someone with real talent pursue their dreams felt more meaningful than anything he had done in years. The conversation ended with Marcus promising to send over contracts and arrangements within the next few days. After hanging up, Sarah sat on a park bench for a long time, letting the reality sink in. She had just agreed to perform a solo piano recital at a prestigious concert hall in 6 weeks. The thought was terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. That evening, Sarah went back to the Grand Sterling for her regular shift. Word had spread among the staff about what had happened the previous night, and everyone wanted to talk to her about it. Some of her coworkers were genuinely excited for her, while others seemed slightly jealous or skeptical that anything would really come of the opportunity. Sarah tried to stay focused on her work, but her mind kept drifting to the challenge ahead. True to his word, Marcus had already arranged for Sarah to meet with a renowned piano teacher named Professor Margaret Chen. Professor Chen had taught at Juilliard for 30 years before retiring to take on only a select few private students. She was known as a demanding teacher who could identify flaws in technique that other teachers missed, but who could also bring out the very best in talented students. When Sarah arrived at Professor Chen's elegant townhouse for her first lesson, she felt like a student again, nervous and uncertain. The professor was a small elderly woman with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through people. She led Sarah to a beautiful music room with a concert grand piano and told her to play something, anything, so she could assess her current level. Sarah chose to play the same Chopin nocturne she had performed at the restaurant. As she played, Professor Chen sat perfectly still, her face showing no emotion. When Sarah finished, there was a long silence. Finally, the professor spoke, and her assessment was brutally honest. She said Sarah had natural talent and beautiful musicality, but that her technique had deteriorated from years without proper practice. Her finger strength was inconsistent, her pedaling was sometimes imprecise, and she had developed some bad habits that would need to be corrected. The words stung, but Sarah knew they were true. She asked Professor Chen if she thought 6 weeks was enough time to prepare for a concert. The professor was quiet for a moment, considering. Then she said that 6 weeks was not much time, but it could be done if Sarah was willing to practice intensively and follow her instructions exactly. It would require several hours of practice every day, attention to every detail, and a willingness to break down and rebuild aspects of her playing. Sarah agreed to whatever it took. Professor Chen seemed satisfied with her determination and immediately began outlining a practice schedule and choosing pieces for the concert program. In addition to the Chopin Nocturne, she suggested Beethoven's Piano Sonata No. 14, commonly known as the Moonlight Sonata, and several shorter pieces by Debussy and Rachmaninoff. It was an ambitious program that would showcase different aspects of Sarah's abilities. Over the next few weeks, Sarah's life transformed completely. Mr. Peterson had given her the leave of absence as promised, and she devoted herself to practicing with an intensity she hadn't felt since her teenage years. She would wake up early and practice for 3 hours before meeting with Professor Chen for a lesson. After the lesson, she would practice for several more hours, working on the specific technical issues the professor had identified. The work was exhausting but also exhilarating. Sarah felt parts of herself reawakening that had been dormant for years. Her fingers grew stronger, her technique more refined. Professor Chen was a demanding teacher, sometimes sharp in her criticism, but Sarah could feel herself improving rapidly under her guidance. The older woman seemed to genuinely care about Sarah's success, perhaps seeing in her a reminder of her own younger self. As word spread about the upcoming concert, interest began to build. The woman from the restaurant who had season tickets to the opera was true to her word, telling all her wealthy friends about the talented waitress who would be performing. Local newspapers picked up the story, fascinated by the narrative of a struggling waitress getting a chance to perform at a prestigious venue. Some reporters called it a fairy tale, which made Sarah uncomfortable because it simplified the years of training and sacrifice that lay behind her ability. Marcus Thornfield had taken a surprisingly active interest in promoting the concert. He used his business connections to spread the word among the city's elite, and he personally guaranteed that the event would be worth attending. Some people wondered about his motivations, speculating that he was trying to rehabilitate his public image or assuage his guilt over how he had treated Sarah. But when reporters asked him about it, Marcus simply said that helping Sarah felt like the most meaningful thing he had done in years. Sarah tried to avoid reading too much about herself in the papers or online. Some of the coverage was positive, celebrating her talent and her story, but there were also skeptics and critics who suggested she was being overhyped, that she was just a competent amateur who happened to impress some easily moved restaurant diners. A few professional musicians weighed in, some supportively and others dismissively, debating whether someone with her limited recent performance experience belonged in such a prestigious venue. The criticism hurt, but Professor Chen advised Sarah to ignore it all. She told her that critics would always exist and that the only thing that mattered was the quality of her actual performance. If Sarah played well, none of the advanced skepticism would matter. If she played poorly, none of the advanced praise would save her. The only real judge would be the music itself and how honestly Sarah expressed it. As the concert date approached, Sarah began to feel the pressure building. She had moments of panic where she wondered if she was making a huge mistake, if she was setting herself up for public humiliation. What if she forgot the music in the middle of a piece? What if her nerves caused her fingers to freeze? What if the skeptics were right and she really wasn't good enough for this level of performance? Professor Chen seemed to sense Sarah's growing anxiety. During one lesson, just a week before the concert, she stopped Sarah in the middle of a passage and told her to close her eyes and breathe. The professor reminded her that music was not about perfection or impressing people. It was about honesty, about sharing something true and beautiful with others. She told Sarah that she had already proven she could do that in the restaurant, and that the upcoming concert was simply a chance to do it again for more people. The week before the concert passed in a blur of intensive practice sessions and growing anxiety. Sarah spent every waking hour either at the piano or thinking about the piano. Her fingers were sore from the constant work, but Professor Chen insisted that pushing through the discomfort was necessary to build the stamina needed for a full concert program. The elderly teacher had seen countless students over her decades of teaching, and she knew how to prepare someone for the unique pressure of a solo performance. 3 days before the concert, Sarah was allowed to visit the concert hall where she would be performing. Carnegie Recital Hall was a beautiful, intimate space with excellent acoustics and seating for about 200 people. When Sarah walked onto the stage and saw the stunning Steinway concert grand piano waiting there, she felt a mixture of excitement and terror. This was really happening. In just 3 days, she would stand on this stage in front of a paying audience and reveal herself completely through her music. The hall manager let Sarah spend an hour getting familiar with the piano in the space. She played through sections of her program, adjusting to the instrument's unique voice and the way sound carried in the room. Every piano was different with its own personality, and a smart performer took time to understand the instrument they would be playing. This particular piano was magnificent, responsive to the slightest touch, capable of both thunderous power and delicate whispers. As Sarah practiced in the empty hall, she thought about all the talented musicians who had performed on this stage over the years. Some had gone on to famous careers while others had faded into obscurity despite their gifts. She wondered which category she would fall into, then reminded herself that Professor Chen's advice was right. None of that speculation mattered. The only thing that mattered was playing honestly and well for the people who would come to hear her. News of the concert had spread widely through the city. The tickets, which Marcus had priced affordably so that regular people could attend, sold out within 2 days. Many of Sarah's co-workers from the Grand Sterling had bought tickets, as had several regular customers who had heard the story of her impromptu performance. The wealthy diners who had been present that night all had reserved seats, including Marcus Thornfield himself, who had taken an entire row for his family and business associates. Reporters had requested interviews, and Sarah had reluctantly agreed to a few. She found it strange to be the focus of so much attention after years of being invisible. The journalists all wanted to tell the same story about the poor waitress getting her big break, but Sarah tried to complicate that narrative. She explained that she wasn't some diamond in the rough who had never had opportunities. She had received training, had been offered a scholarship, had made choices that led to where she was now. Life wasn't as simple as the fairy tale version they wanted to write. The day before the concert, Professor Chen told Sarah to stop practicing. She explained that at this point, more practice would only increase anxiety without improving performance. Sarah needed to rest her mind and body to arrive at the concert fresh rather than exhausted. The professor also shared some final wisdom about performance that had nothing to do with technique. She told Sarah that the audience would be on her side, wanting her to succeed, and that she should think of performing not as a test, but as a gift she was giving to others. That night, Sarah barely slept. She lay in bed running through the music in her mind, her fingers occasionally twitching as if playing on an invisible keyboard. She thought about her father and wished desperately that he could be there to see her perform. He had always believed in her talent, had sacrificed to give her lessons, had told her that music would always be a source of meaning in her life even if she never became famous. In a way, everything that was happening now was because of the foundation he had built. The morning of the concert arrived with bright spring sunshine. Sarah woke up feeling strangely calm, as if her mind had decided that panic was no longer useful and had shifted into a different mode. She ate a light breakfast, took a long shower, and spent time sitting quietly in her apartment. The concert wasn't until evening, so she had hours to wait. The anticipation was almost unbearable. In the afternoon, Sarah's brother Daniel arrived from college. He had taken time off from classes to attend the concert, insisting that he wouldn't miss this moment for anything. His presence meant everything to Sarah. He was the reason she had given up her scholarship all those years ago, and seeing him now, thriving in college and proud of his sister, made all those years of sacrifice feel worthwhile. Daniel helped Sarah get ready, making jokes to ease her tension and reminding her that no matter what happened, he was proud of her. He told her that their father would be bursting with pride if he could see her now. Sarah found herself crying, but they were good tears. Tears of gratitude and love for her brother who had always supported her, even when supporting him had cost her so much. As evening approached, Sarah put on the concert dress that Marcus had insisted on buying for her. It was a simple but elegant black gown that made her feel sophisticated and professional. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the person staring back. She looked like a real concert pianist, not like someone who had been serving coffee and clearing plates just weeks ago. The transformation was external, but it reflected something internal that had also changed. The car Marcus had arranged arrived to take Sarah, Daniel, and Professor Chen to the concert hall. The drive through the city felt surreal. Sarah watched the buildings and people pass by, thinking about how many times she had walked these streets feeling invisible and unimportant. Tonight she would step onto a stage and be seen, truly seen for who she really was beneath all the roles and responsibilities that usually defined her. When they arrived at Carnegie Recital Hall, there was already a crowd gathering outside. Sarah entered through the performer's entrance, avoiding the main lobby where audience members were beginning to arrive. She was taken to a small dressing room backstage where she could wait until it was time to perform. The room had a mirror, a small couch, and a piano where she could warm up her fingers if needed. Professor Chen stayed with Sarah, offering quiet encouragement and helping her maintain her focus. The elderly teacher seemed almost as invested in this performance as Sarah herself, perhaps because she saw it as validation of her own ability to still shape and guide talented musicians. She told Sarah one more time that she was ready, that she had worked hard and prepared well, and that all she needed to do now was trust her training and play from her heart. Meanwhile, in the concert hall, the audience was filling the seats. Marcus Thornfield arrived with his daughter Emily, a young woman in her late 20s who looked uncomfortable and distant from her father. This was the daughter Marcus had forbidden from studying music, and bringing her to Sarah's concert was his way of trying to make amends. Emily sat stiffly in her seat, clearly resentful about being there, not yet understanding what the evening would mean for both her and her father. Sarah's co-workers from the Grand Sterling arrived as a group, excited and nervous for their colleague. They had chipped in to buy a large bouquet of flowers to give her after the performance. Mr. Peterson, the restaurant manager, looked around the elegant concert hall feeling amazed that the quiet waitress he had supervised for 2 years was about to perform in such a prestigious venue. He felt guilty for never seeing her as a complete person, for never asking about her life beyond the restaurant. The elderly gentleman who had cried during Sarah's restaurant performance arrived early and sat in the front row. He had brought his entire extended family, wanting to share with them the gift that Sarah's music had given him. The woman with the opera season tickets arrived with a group of her wealthy friends, all curious to see if the talented waitress could live up to the buzz that had been building around the concert. Some professional musicians and music critics were also in attendance, though their reasons for coming varied. Some were genuinely curious about Sarah's talent, having heard impressive descriptions from people whose judgment they respected. Others came with skepticism, doubting that someone with Sarah's limited recent performance experience could deliver a truly professional concert. A few critics seemed almost eager for her to fail, as if her success would somehow diminish the achievements of musicians who had followed more traditional paths. Backstage, Sarah could hear the murmur of the crowd through the walls. The sound made her heart race. Professor Chen noticed and reminded her to breathe slowly and deeply, to center herself before going on stage. In 20 minutes, the concert would begin. Sarah closed her eyes and thought about her father one more time, imagining him sitting in the audience, smiling at her the way he used to when she was a little girl playing her first simple pieces. A stage manager knocked on the dressing room door to give Sarah a 10-minute warning. Professor Chen hugged her student, something the usually formal teacher rarely did. and told her to go out there and show everyone what she could do. Daniel squeezed his sister's hand and said he loved her. Then Sarah was alone, standing in the wings of the stage waiting for her cue to walk out and begin the most important performance of her life. The house lights dimmed and the audience chatter faded to silence. The stage lights came up, illuminating the beautiful grand piano waiting in the center of the stage. Sarah took one final deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked out into the light. The audience applauded as she appeared, and she gave a small bow before taking her seat at the piano. For just a moment, Sarah sat completely still, her hands resting in her lap. She looked out at the sea of faces watching her expectantly. She saw Marcus Thornfield and his daughter in the third row. She saw her co-workers from the restaurant scattered throughout the audience. She saw Professor Chen standing at the back of the hall. And although she knew it was impossible, she felt her father's presence too, as if his love and belief in her had somehow transcended death to be with her in this moment. Sarah placed her hands on the piano keys and began to play. Her opening piece was Debussy's Clair de Lune, a work of shimmering beauty that required both technical precision and deep emotional understanding. From the very first notes, it was clear that Sarah had transformed over the past 6 weeks. Her technique was sharp, her touch was confident, and most importantly, her playing conveyed genuine feeling that resonated through the hall. The audience fell into that special kind of silence that only happens when people are truly captivated. Every note seemed to hang in the air, painting pictures in the listeners' minds. The music flowed like water, sometimes gentle and reflective, other times building to moments of greater intensity. Sarah's fingers danced across the keys with a combination of strength and delicacy that showed the countless hours of practice she had devoted to this moment. As she played, Sarah felt something shifting inside her. The nervousness that had consumed her before walking on stage had evaporated, replaced by a pure focus on the music itself. She wasn't thinking about the audience judging her or the critics waiting to write their reviews. She was simply living inside the music, letting it flow through her and out into the world. This was what her father had tried to teach her all those years ago, and what she had finally found again. When the Debussy piece concluded, the audience erupted in enthusiastic applause. Sarah allowed herself a small smile as she acknowledged their response. She could see people in the front rows leaning forward in their seats, completely engaged. Even the skeptical critics in the back looked impressed, though they were trying to maintain their professional detachment. Sarah moved directly into her next piece, a set of Rachmaninoff preludes that showcased her technical abilities. These were dramatically different from the Debussy, requiring powerful playing and complex chord progressions that could challenge even accomplished pianists. Sarah attacked the music with energy and confidence, her hands flying across the keyboard in passages that would have been impossible for her just 6 weeks ago. Marcus Thornfield watched from his seat with an expression of wonder mixed with regret. Next to him, his daughter Emily had stopped looking bored and distant. She was staring at Sarah with an intensity that Marcus recognized. Emily's face showed longing, pain, and a kind of hunger that comes from witnessing someone else living the life you were forced to abandon. Marcus glanced at his daughter and felt a wave of shame wash over him for what he had taken from her. The Rachmaninoff pieces built to a thunderous conclusion that left the audience breathless. When Sarah finally lifted her hands from the keys, there was a moment of stunned silence before the applause began. This time, it was even more enthusiastic than before, with several people standing up. Sarah stood and bowed, feeling the warmth of the audience's approval washing over her like sunlight. After a brief pause, Sarah returned to the piano for the centerpiece of her program, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. This was one of the most famous piano works in the classical repertoire, a piece that everyone knew, which meant there was nowhere to hide any deficiencies in her playing. The slow, haunting first movement required perfect control and deep emotional expression. A single wrong note or awkward phrase would be immediately obvious. Sarah began the famous opening movement with exquisite care. Each note was placed precisely, building a mood of melancholy beauty that seemed to transform the concert hall into a different world. The audience members found themselves holding their breath, afraid that any sound might break the spell. Even the critics, who had heard the Moonlight Sonata performed by countless pianists over the years, found themselves drawn into Sarah's interpretation. What made Sarah's playing special was not just technical proficiency, but emotional authenticity. When she played the gentle, questioning phrases of the first movement, you could hear in the music all the years of struggle and sacrifice she had endured. When the music turned darker and more turbulent, you could feel her doubts and fears. This wasn't just someone performing notes on a page. This was someone pouring her entire life experience into the music. The second movement provided a brief respite, lighter and more delicate. Sarah played it with a touch of bittersweet hope, as if the music were asking whether beauty could survive in a harsh world. Then came the explosive final movement, a torrent of notes that demanded both incredible speed and emotional power. Sarah's hands were a blur as she navigated the treacherous passages, building to a climax that left the audience stunned. When the final notes of the Moonlight Sonata faded away, the audience sat in silence for several seconds, too moved to immediately applaud. Then someone began clapping, and within moments the entire hall was on its feet, giving Sarah a standing ovation. The sound was deafening, echoing off the walls of the concert hall. People were shouting "Brava!" and wiping tears from their eyes. Sarah stood and bowed deeply, overwhelmed by the response. She could see her brother Daniel in the audience with tears streaming down his face. She saw her co-workers from the restaurant cheering wildly. She saw Professor Chen nodding with satisfaction and pride. And she saw Marcus Thornfield standing and applauding with genuine enthusiasm, his arm around his daughter Emily, who was also crying. The standing ovation continued for several minutes. Sarah bowed again and again, barely able to process what was happening. Finally, as the applause began to subside, she returned to the piano bench. She had one more piece to play, the Chopin Nocturne that had started this entire journey. This was the piece she had played in the restaurant, the performance that had changed her life. Now she would play it again, but this time as a real concert pianist rather than a waitress trying to embarrass. Sarah's fingers found the opening notes and the familiar melody filled the hall. But this performance was different from the one at the restaurant. She had grown as a musician over the past 6 weeks, and her interpretation had deepened. Every phrase was more nuanced, every dynamic more carefully shaped. The piece had always been beautiful, but now it was transcendent. As Sarah played, several members of the audience found themselves crying. The elderly gentleman in the front row was thinking of his late wife again, but this time the tears were not just of loss, but also of gratitude for the beauty that still existed in the world. The woman with the opera season tickets was thinking about how rarely she was truly moved by performances anymore, and how special it was to witness something this authentic. Marcus Thornfield was thinking about his daughter, and all the years he had forced her to suppress her own musical gifts. He looked at Emily and saw that she was transfixed by Sarah's playing, her face showing emotions that Marcus rarely saw her express anymore. In that moment, Marcus made a decision. Whatever it took, whatever it cost him, he would help Emily find her way back to music if that was what she wanted. He had stolen something precious from her, and he would spend the rest of his life trying to make it right. Sarah reached the final, gentle notes of the nocturne. She played them so softly that people in the back of the hall had to lean forward to hear. The last note hung in the air like a question, then slowly faded into silence. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the audience erupted once more, this time with even greater enthusiasm than before. The standing ovation was unanimous and sustained. People were not just applauding out of politeness or obligation. They were responding to something genuine and rare, a performance that had touched them deeply. Sarah stood and bowed, and this time she allowed herself to really smile. She had done it.
She had proven to herself and to everyone else that she was a real musician.
That the years of sacrifice and struggle had not destroyed her gift. The stage manager brought out the flowers from her co-workers, and Sarah accepted them with visible emotion. Several other bouquets were also brought to the stage, sent by audience members who wanted to express their appreciation. Sarah bowed one final time and left the stage, but the applause continued. The audience was calling for an encore. Sarah returned to the stage surprised and delighted by the continued enthusiasm. She had not prepared an encore, but she decided to play a short piece by Chopin that she knew well, a mazurka that was both playful and poignant. She played it with joy and freedom, no longer worried about judgment or criticism, just sharing music for the pure pleasure of it. When she finally left the stage for the last time, Sarah felt a sense of completion that she had not experienced in years. She had proven something important tonight, not just to the audience, but to herself. She was a musician. That core part of her identity, which she had tried to suppress and ignore for years, was real and valid and valuable. Backstage, Sarah was immediately surrounded by people wanting to congratulate her. Professor Chen embraced her student with tears in her eyes. telling her she had played magnificently. Daniel hugged his sister and told her how proud their father would have been. Mr. Peterson and the other co-workers from the restaurant crowded around, all talking at once about how incredible the performance had been. Several music critics and journalists were waiting to speak with Sarah. Their questions were respectful and genuinely curious rather than skeptical. They wanted to know about her training, her interpretation of the pieces, her future plans. Sarah answered as honestly as she could, still somewhat in shock from everything that had happened. Marcus Thornfield arrived backstage with his daughter Emily. For once, Marcus hung back and let Emily approach Sarah first. The younger woman looked nervous but determined. She told Sarah that the concert had been extraordinary, and that watching her perform had reminded Emily of who she used to be before she gave up music. With her father standing right there, Emily said something that clearly took courage. She told Sarah that she wanted to start playing piano again, that she had let fear and pressure make her abandon something she loved, but that Sarah's courage had inspired her to try to find her way back. Sarah took Emily's hands and told her it was never too late to reclaim the parts of yourself that you had lost. She shared her own story of years away from music, of practical responsibilities that seemed to make dreams impossible, of the fear that had almost kept her from accepting this concert opportunity. The two women connected in that moment, understanding each other's struggles in a way that went beyond words. In the weeks following the concert, Sarah's life changed in ways she could never have imagined. The performance had been recorded, and clips of it spread rapidly across social media. Music lovers around the world watched videos of the waitress turned pianist and were moved by both her playing and her story. Within days, the recordings had been viewed millions of times, with comments praising not just her technical skill, but the emotional depth of her interpretations. Several music conservatories and universities reached out to Sarah, offering her opportunities to study or teach. A few concert venues extended invitations for her to perform again. A small classical music label contacted her about recording an album. Sarah found herself overwhelmed by possibilities that had seemed completely out of reach just weeks earlier. The struggling waitress who could barely pay her bills was suddenly fielding offers that could transform her entire future. But Sarah approached these opportunities with careful consideration rather than blind enthusiasm. She had learned from her years of hardship that sustainable success required more than just talent and a lucky break. She needed a realistic plan, proper support, and the ability to maintain her responsibilities to her family while pursuing her dreams. She wasn't going to abandon her brother or her mother, even if her career was taking off. Marcus Thornfield continued to surprise everyone, including himself, with his ongoing support. He established a scholarship fund in Sarah's father's name to help young musicians from working-class families pursue their education. The fund would cover not just tuition but also living expenses, so that talented students wouldn't have to choose between music and financial survival the way Sarah had been forced to do. Marcus also became a patron of the arts in a more genuine way than he had been before. He had always donated to cultural institutions for tax benefits and social status, but now he actually attended concerts and exhibitions. He was learning to appreciate beauty and creativity in ways that his business-focused life had never allowed. His relationship with his daughter Emily had begun to heal as well. Marcus had arranged for her to take piano lessons again, and watching her rediscover her love of music brought him more joy than any business deal ever had. Emily and Sarah became friends, bonding over their shared experiences of having sacrificed music for practical concerns. Emily had abandoned her dreams to please her father, while Sarah had abandoned hers to support her family. Both women understood the pain of living with a fundamental part of yourself suppressed, and both were now working to reclaim what they had lost. They sometimes practiced together, encouraging each other through the difficult process of rebuilding skills and confidence. At the Grand Sterling restaurant, Sarah's unexpected success had created a shift in how the staff was treated. Mr. Peterson had been forced to confront his own blindness to the full humanity of his employees. He implemented new policies that gave workers more respect and better opportunities. He started asking staff members about their lives, their interests, their dreams beyond the restaurant. Several other workers revealed talents and aspirations that Peterson had never known about, reminding him that every person contained hidden depths if you bothered to look. Sarah made the decision to continue working at the restaurant part-time, even as her music career began to develop. She wanted to maintain her connection to that world and to the people who had supported her. She also felt that the humility and groundedness that came from service work kept her perspective balanced. Some of her new contacts in the classical music world thought it was strange that a pianist who could fill concert halls still waited tables. But Sarah didn't care. She had learned that there was no shame in honest work, and that maintaining her roots was important to her. Professor Chen took enormous pride in Sarah's success, though she was careful not to take too much credit for it. The elderly teacher knew that she had helped polish and refine Sarah's abilities, but the core talent and determination had always been there. What Professor Chen had really done was help Sarah trust herself again, to believe that she was worthy of being heard. That more than any technical instruction had been the real gift. The elderly gentleman who had cried during both of Sarah's performances became one of her most devoted supporters. He attended every concert she gave in the city and brought different family members each time, wanting to share with them the beauty that Sarah's music brought into the world. He established a tradition of bringing flowers to every performance, always the same type that his late wife had loved. Sarah came to watch for him in the audience, and his presence became a source of comfort and continuity. As Sarah's performance opportunities increased, she began to develop her own artistic voice and vision. She programmed concerts that mixed classical masterpieces with contemporary composers, trying to make classical music more accessible to audiences who might find it intimidating. She gave free performances at schools and community centers, remembering what it was like to grow up without much access to live music. She used her growing platform to advocate for arts education and to support other musicians from working-class backgrounds. Not everything was smooth in Sarah's new life. There were critics who dismissed her as a novelty act, arguing that her compelling backstory was more impressive than her actual musical abilities. Some professional musicians resented the attention she received, feeling that they had worked just as hard, but lacked her dramatic narrative. Sarah learned to accept that not everyone would support or appreciate her, and that criticism came with any level of success. She also struggled with moments of doubt and insecurity. Sometimes she would wake up in the middle of the night, convinced that she was a fraud who had fooled people into thinking she was better than she actually was. The years of being invisible and overlooked had left psychological scars that didn't heal overnight. But Sarah was learning to manage these feelings, to recognize them as the echoes of past struggles rather than accurate assessments of her current reality. Daniel finished his engineering degree and found a good job, which meant Sarah no longer needed to support him financially. This freed up resources and time for her to focus more intensively on her music career. Her mother's health had stabilized and the family's financial situation had improved dramatically, thanks to Sarah's concert earnings and the money Marcus had given her. For the first time in years, Sarah could breathe without constant financial anxiety pressing down on her. Sarah recorded her first album 8 months after the concert at Carnegie Recital Hall. She chose pieces that had personal meaning to her, including the Chopin Nocturne that had started everything, along with works by composers who had overcome their own struggles. The album was titled Second Chances, and the liner notes told her story honestly, without romanticizing the difficulties she had faced. The recording received positive reviews and sold surprisingly well for a classical music release by an unknown artist. The relationship between Sarah and Marcus evolved into an unexpected friendship. They came from completely different worlds and in many ways they had very little in common. But the incident at the restaurant had changed both of them in fundamental ways. Marcus had been forced to confront his own arrogance and cruelty, while Sarah had been given the opportunity to reclaim her dreams. They both understood that they had participated in a moment that had transformed their lives, and that created a bond between them. Marcus occasionally invited Sarah to perform at private events for his business associates and friends. These performances were very different from her public concerts. The audiences were small and intimate, and Sarah could speak more personally about the pieces she was playing. Marcus always paid her generously for these appearances, but more importantly, he listened to her music with genuine appreciation. The man who had once tried to humiliate a waitress for entertainment had become someone who understood the value of beauty and human dignity. A year after her breakthrough performance, Sarah was invited to play at a prestigious international music festival. This was a significant milestone, an indication that she was being taken seriously by the classical music establishment. She prepared for the performance with the same intensive focus she had brought to that first concert. working with Professor Chen to refine her interpretation of a challenging program that included works by Bach, Brahms, and modern composers. The festival performance was a triumph. Critics who had been skeptical about Sarah's abilities were forced to acknowledge that she was the real deal, a pianist with both technical command and emotional depth. Her playing had continued to mature and develop, and she was beginning to find her own interpretive voice rather than just reproducing what her teachers had taught her. The festival led to more prestigious invitations, and Sarah's career continued to build momentum. Through all of this success, Sarah tried to stay grounded and remember where she came from. She still lived in her small apartment, though she could now afford something much nicer. She still maintained friendships with her former co-workers from the restaurant. She still practiced for hours every day, knowing that talent without discipline was worthless.